as always, I think, remember, you can throw any comments or thoughts in the chat. I'll be able to kind of work on those as we go. And then we'll do the thought exchange questions here at the end. So this is a talk that is new for me, called Herding Pink Elephants. And it's really looking at how do we use remote work to overcome some of the challenges to innovation, creativity, a lot of these sort of things. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Gates. I have the interesting Silicon Valley-esque title of Head Design Evangelist with InVision. If you don't know anything about InVision, there are a couple of things I want to share. The first is actually a free resource. I'll talk about this more in a minute. We are a 100% remote company. It's been interesting to hear a lot of people talk today about how, can completely remote companies work and different things like that. So we're a 100% remote company. One of the things that we tried to do was to put together what are some of the best resources, best thinking, different things like that. And so I know this is called Remote Work for Design Teams. And so part of it definitely focuses on if you are working on design and doing things like that, this is definitely in there. But look, I would say if you're new to remote work, if you're doing anything like that, this is just the best and the brightest that we have, the best information that we have, we tried to share here. So again, you can just go to designbetter.co. You can see the URL there at the bottom. The book's for free. I think all we ask is for your name and email address, just kind of like a small amount for that. And again, you can go in and be able to download that for free. Super quick about my background if you don't have any idea of who I am. Like I said, I work for InVision. We're a company that was founded in 2011. It's about 700 plus employees, and we're 100% remote. We have been since we were founded. I joined about 2 years ago. My background was I worked for advertising firms. I spent 9 years building the global brand design team at Starwood Hotels. I worked at Citibank, and 2 years ago came to be able to work here. And so, what my work is really interesting. But a lot of what I do is about 25% of my time is spent doing this, right? Like just sort of doing public speaking, teaching, doing things like that. About 75% of my time is really spent working with companies of all sizes, of all different maturities, to help them figure out how to be more creative, how to elevate design, innovation, all the stuff we want to talk about that we all seem to struggle to do. These are some of the companies I do it with. And so again, I think, we have 100% of the world's Fortune 100 brands as our customers. And a lot of what we do are build tools for design, for innovation, for collaboration, for a lot of the things that people have been talking about here today. I also, for the last 3.5 years, this is a passion project of mine called The Crazy One. I never thought the world needed another podcast. I'm almost coming up on about 100 episodes. It talks about leadership, creativity, all that same sort of stuff. I recently launched it as a YouTube channel. So again, a lot of the keynotes that I've done all over the world, a lot of the career coaching, insights, tutorials, all that stuff, right? But enough about that. Remote work is interesting. And so somebody who spent my entire career working in an office 2 years ago went 100% remote. I'm not here just to talk about making your company 100% remote, right? Because I think having worked physically together and then come into a space where you're working remote, it's just different. And I think that, I've heard some people talk about some of the challenges today, and I think they've sort of circled around kind of what's really going on here. But I guess I wanted to sort of share what I think a lot of the teams that I see struggling, what are they struggling with? And that's what I said is this is for me really sort of focusing on if you are in a distributed environment, a partially remote environment, these are some of the things that you are probably experiencing. Very few companies are fully remote. And again, I think a lot of the audience today seemed like they were coming into this for the first time. So I wanted to kind of share around that. One of the biggest things that I see teams struggle with is that whenever you suddenly go into a remote setting, it exposes all your organizational sin. Meaning that if your leadership was weak, if you don't trust each other, if you have difficult infrastructure, if your process isn't what it should be. And the thing is, right, is that these are all things we should have been focusing on before. This is the thing I've spent years talking about, are these issues. It's just whenever you get into this setting, right? Whenever you have this screen and this camera, whenever you can't see people working, now all of a sudden it's something different. And that's sort of the problem, is that I think the companies that are going to do well, the companies that are going to come out of this better and stronger, realize that these were always issues that they had, and that these are things that we need to invest in and work on. That a lot of the leadership models and things like that haven't been working, and the mentalities that haven't been working are now not going to work a lot faster. The leaders that I see who will do those sort of things are like, well, my door is always open. Come and talk to me when you have a problem. I don't think that ever worked. And I definitely don't think that it's going to work now, but I think we're going to start to see a lot more pressure to really see who are the leaders and who are the managers. But a lot of it, if you're coming into this to the first time, I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with is that it used to be you had a block of time in the morning that was sort of your personal time. You had a block of time in the middle of the day that was your work, and you had a block of time at the end of the day that was your personal time. And it was usually marked by being at home, being in an office, being at home. Whenever you do this, and especially when you aren't used to it, those boundaries get put into a complete blender, right? And I think that it really is one of these cases where that can change on an almost minute by minute basis. And if you aren't used to that, I mean, look, I've been doing this for 2 years. If I go to the grocery store during the middle of the day, I still feel guilty. There's a lot of institutional debt and institutional thinking that we bring with us. And so, again, those sort of things definitely happen a lot. So many leaders, so many teams I talk to have this bizarre thing. And I've seen it for 2 years where people are like, oh, well, if I can't see my people, if we're not in the same room, we can't be creative. Or how do I know they're working? I'll often turn that back on those leaders and ask them, what sort of culture have they created? What sort of team have they designed that's the first thing they think of? And like I said, these are the sort of things we should have been focusing on all along. I just think being in person, we can smooth it over. Maybe we got a little lazy. Maybe we did those sort of things that these things haven't been the focus that they probably should have been. But a lot of this for me that I want to talk about today is just really looking at how do we rethink how we work? And like I said, these are the practices that work really well because the challenge that most companies are up against. And again, this is a quote that I have used for a really long time. A friend of mine named Greg Larkin wrote, this great email that says, or wrote this great book that said, that for most companies right now, the innovation they talk about, that they say they want, the creativity that they want to be able to have and do those sort of things, the only way that's going to happen is in a way that's not authorized because there is so much red tape, there is so much process, there is such a lack of trust that we've got ourselves into this position where, again, a lot of these things we should have been focusing on, we're not, and it's sort of reaping the whirlwind right now. Because for most people, the problem isn't having good ideas. It's not coming up with what should we do. The problem is how do we deal with basically all the BS that surrounds them, the politics, the fear of change, the legacy thinking, the apathy of like, why is this company ever going to be different than what it was before? And I think those things are real barriers. This is why we can have innovative ideas, but rarely do they see the light of day because corporate structure and innovation and creativity rarely coexist well together. And that is a massive, massive problem. But for a lot of the organizational change work that I do, you start to really see that it comes down to there are two different parts to being able to create change. There is behavior and there is thinking. Behavior is just what it sounds like. How do people act? What are the words they use? What are the processes we have? And most companies just focus on behavior. And the problem with this is that whenever we get different behavior, it means we get a new mission statement or new values. We get these sort of things where maybe we talk a little bit differently, but the problem doesn't change. And when the problem doesn't change, what that means is that it just re-expresses itself in a new form down the road. Because what you need to do is you need to get to the way people think, which is the real problem. It's how we act. It's how do we show up for work every day. And this is often where the real challenges really exist. So that's what I want to focus on, are sort of two different areas that really look at this. The first one is just what the title of the talk was, right? Like pink elephants. And if culturally you aren't sure what that is, pink elephants are just what are the problems that are right in front of us? And again, have been before we went into this place and will exist after. We all know they're there. These are things in all of our companies that in our teams that we recognize that there are problems there. We just don't know what to do about it. It feels too big. There are things we're just not sure what's going on there. And the other one is trust, because I think, these are the sort of things that just aren't discussed enough. And the hallmark of any great team that I've ever worked with has been trust. But let's start with pink elephants. And this is, the thing for me is that for a lot of teams, it really is, how do we start to invest in cultural and emotional innovation at the same pace that we invest in product innovation, right? So we're all really good about what is the work that needs to do? What's the app that needs to ship? What's that thing that we need to produce? But the reality is I think most companies think that like, oh, if we produce more work, then our culture and our people will get better. They'll be happier. Not the case, right? And I think especially in a moment like this, where being human first and work second is so important, it becomes even more of an issue around this. But this is the sort of thing is that, culture and emotions are hard. People are difficult. These are things that become a little bit more interesting and a little bit slipperier to be able to work with sometimes. But the thing that I'll say is that the best teams that I've ever worked with, the best teams that I've ever led or have been able to work alongside, are deliberate in how they work. And you see a lot of them that now what they do, they are being really successful. They haven't missed a beat. They're probably more productive. Well, the reason is because they've worked on their culture and their trust and a lot of those sort of things, because the work is the truth. Because if your team and company is healthy, the work is good. If your team is dysfunctional and you have too many silos, then again, the work will reflect that. But that's what I'm saying is the things that we need to work on and talk about will translate back into whatever the hell normal is going to look like on the other side of this. And we don't want to overcorrect and say, well, let's just work on remote. And because of that, right, like tools and processes are just the foundation. And I think a lot of people get really hung up on, should we use Zoom or what platform should we use? Or, again, how do we do this stuff? Look, I get it. It's an important thing to have worked out. But I can tell you, again, working with these teams, I'll see teams who have identical tools, identical processes. Have I hired people from identical places? One is wildly successful. The other one's a low-grade dumpster fire. These things alone are not going to make you successful. They're not going to connect people. This is not going to be the solution unto itself. But that's what we need to be able to talk about, or what are these sort of cultural barriers? What are these problems that are right in front of all of us that we struggle with to be able to work through? And especially because I think too many people also confuse remote for distant, distracted, disconnected. And that's not the case. And so a big part of it is, and I think especially this time, it's very easy to get unmotivated. It's very easy to say, look, I couldn't figure out how to get my company to change before. Now that we're doing this, how do I have any hope of doing this? And a lot of what I see is this will usually express itself on every team through a phrase. And what happens is you'll be doing a brainstorm, you'll be talking with somebody, you'll be doing this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden it gets hard, it gets challenging. We're not sure what to do. The outcome, we're not sure what we're going to be able to do. And somebody will say, well, welcome to working here. Or that there's some phrase like that, that whenever you say it, sort of makes being mediocre after that okay, because, well, it's always the way it's been here. We've always struggled here, so why should this time be any different? But the problem is, again, that's one of those things where every day we're allowing mediocrity in. Every day where it's just like, if somehow somebody said it, then it's okay to just sort of mail it in after that. And one of the things that I like to do are come up with these, again, everybody's really big on frameworks or flywheels or whatever the hell you want to call it, right? That's not the point. But it's just like, how can we come up with ways to take on some of these things in our teams? Because the other great part about remote is that this is like being on this first 6 months of being on a job, right? Like in the first 6 months, you can try most anything. You can get away with a lot because you're new there. And again, you have that permission to be able to try those things out. Welcome to the first 6 months of everybody being through this, right? So again, I think we're all in a place where we can try these things out. One of the things that I used to do that worked really well, and you can do it virtually as well, was I used to have this, it would almost be like an apathy swear jar. And what it would be is if anybody said that phrase in a meeting that I was in, you owed me $20. And the reason why it was $20, because some people get like why so much? If it's $1, nobody cares. But I'm also very aware that some people are very fluid in the way that they budget. But again, I wanted it to be enough to be memorable. Now, the money went to buy beer or to do things for the team. It wasn't for like my car payment. But the point was that we couldn't let this sort of apathy just happen all the time. It just couldn't exist. And it existed every day right in front of us. So it were these little ways of being able to say, how do we start to take this on without sort of scolding people or doing things like that? Another big one here was like the fear of learning. And the thing for this is like a lot of people will say like fail fast, or we need to fail, or we need to do. There are certain words that I have like crusades against. Failure is 100% one of them. Failure for me is just badly positioned learning. Failure is whenever we don't share. Failure is whenever we don't evolve. Failure is whenever we hold on to information. Failure is not what we want to do. And I think, the way that I think there's a really good way to take this on was there are things that I've done with my own teams and others. We used to do one called the belly flop of the week, which was that I would give a bottle of champagne to the person who would admit that they screwed up the biggest every single week and what they learned from it. Because culturally, the teams I was on, you couldn't, like, admitting you had done something wrong, or that, again, we learned something, was just not accepted. But that's what creativity is it's going through and figuring this stuff out, of going through and finding what it is we want to do. So I needed to make that culturally okay. I needed to be able to let people have this discussion, to share it. I mean, and plus, can you imagine actually showing up to a meeting excited to talk about what went wrong this week and what you learned from it? So again, to be able to take on things like this and pull them out into the light of day. Team mentality. I think this is a really big one for especially like days like this, right? Because there are a lot of teams that I think are really clear about what is their mentality, what do they believe in. Those are the teams that are doing well. The ones where they don't have that, people feel isolated, they feel distracted, they feel distanced, because we often will obsess over process and methodology, over feedback and 360s and like all this sort of stuff, right? But the thing with all of those is that these usually are addressing problems retroactively, meaning that happened in the past, and reactively. So something went wrong, we don't want to have it happen again, so let's throw a bunch of process at it. That rarely ever works, and most of the times it actually just makes things a lot more difficult. But very few teams do actually see of how are they defining the mentality of the work we're about to do. And again, it's great, you need to have process, you have repeatable success, but how are we thinking about the mindset of people? How are we thinking about mental health? And again, what is the contract we're making with each other? So the way that I'll share here is to just simply define behaviors. And behaviors are, how are we going to show up every day in every meeting for each other? And again, these things are not rocket science. They are not difficult. They're not hard to figure out. Writing them down, holding people accountable to them does seem to be something that is much more difficult for people. They can be simple, right? Like if you have projection bias issues, which is cognitive bias is a trend where we just see the world in weird ways and we aren't putting customers at the center of everything we do. Okay, well, let's agree to that. Let's say that's the source of truth. Let's stop this stupid fighting about which team internally is right. I see so many teams, that's what they spend so much of their effort doing, is figuring out who's right, that who's wrong and who's loses out is their customer. Not a good look, doesn't really work. Again, invite diverse perspectives to the table. Collaboration is the new form of creativity and innovation. You need everybody from legal to compliance, engineering, product design. Everybody needs to work together. And again, if the war is to figure out who's going to take credit at the end of this, hope you enjoy mediocre work and launching things nobody gives a shit about, right? Because that's going to be what happens. Simple things like culture cards, the ability to then write those down. I can show you. So at InVision, we have these. There's a deck of these that we use all the time where in a meeting, you can hold these up to be able to call somebody out and say, look, I think this is really great. You're doing this. I want to call you out and really kind of praise you for this. Or if there are places where you need somebody to have more of that mentality and they're not, again, the ability to do that. But again, to be clear about what your culture is, if you want everybody on the same page, you need to be able to start to document these things. But the other big part of it, as you're transitioning into this thing of what does remote look like, is recognizing this is not normal for a lot of people. You are a chef, a babysitter, an educator, a work, whatever it is, a leader, whatever that thing is, again, all the time. And you have to be able to think about and take this stuff on and talk about it. And because that's the thing, is the biggest challenge in remote is how easy it is to suffer in silence. Super easy to turn this camera on, to put on a performance, to smile and say everything is great, and then feel so disconnected and so lost and not sure what is going on. And again, for us as a team that is 100% remote, there's some simple things that you can do to try to help people through this. And again, you need to help people adjust to the new normal, and they're simple. Make interruptions okay. People have dogs and children. People come into the room. There's noise outside. That's just simply, again, I was on a huge webinar like 2 weeks ago, and the person who I was hosting it with, all of a sudden his smoke alarm went off because his kids decided to make popcorn. That's fine. Again, we need to be able to be clear about what is going on with this stuff. We need to make going slower okay. There's this ridiculous myth that somehow we're always on now that we're doing things digitally. We were never always on before. People weren't available all the time. They were in meetings, they were in offsites, they needed work to be able to get done. And again, we need to be able to think about being human. If you want to keep your best talent, if you want to be able to be successful to come out the other side of this, the teams that are human, the teams that recognize what is going on, those are the ones that are going to keep their talent. Everybody else, and trust me, I talked to a lot of them, have started looking because they've realized who they're a part of thinks they're a resource. Not a good look. But that's why I said, you have to make not always being on okay. Be thoughtful. Again, I don't have kids and I don't sleep. If you write to me at 11 o'clock at night, I would probably write you back. But instead, what I do is put it into a folder to send it at 9 a.m. the next morning. I don't want other people to feel like they need to be working then or they need to write me back. Because again, I tend to work more into the evening. That's where I put more of my hours. I don't want everybody else to be able to do that. So again, to be able to make the not being on an okay. But also, it needs to be okay to not be okay. You can have a problem, say, this isn't my best day, I'm only at 50%, and be able to talk about that. And that needs and has to be okay. because we are going through so much. People are dealing with so many different things. We have to be human and empathetic first. And so again, I think this becomes something that is really important, because there is just simply going to be no substitute for real connection. And that's what I said. And I think, that's the amazing opportunity here, is because you get to see into everybody's lives, into their houses, into this sort of stuff. That creates better connections with everybody. But a lot of this also comes down to trust, because that's the thing, is how many people reach out to me and say, I just don't think my leaders are getting it. I don't know that they actually trust us. Because I think that's when what seems to be the most challenging aspect for a lot of people as they transition into this is, again, I can't see you. And so what happens? We micromanage. Everyone's calendar is flooded with meetings. We're doing all this sort of stuff that is just ridiculous, because that's the thing, is that now it's like, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? Again, we have to be able to trust each other. And this sort of mentality is not going to work. You're going to drive people crazy. You're going to plummet your creativity, and you're going to burn people out. Because I guarantee you, being remote, and I see this all the time when people join our teams, right? Like, oh, they want to be invested. You do 3 or 4 hours of this and doing meetings back to back, it will burn you out more than a day of being in person 100% of the time, because you don't get to walk between conference rooms or go grab lunch or do that sort of stuff. And so again, this becomes really challenging. But again, if you want to talk about being really successful, trust is the key to everything. I don't care if it's remote or in person. And the more you start to work on that, the better you're going to be. And the thing is that most people don't understand there's actually 2 types of trust. There is practical trust and emotional trust. Trust is not just one dimensional. Practical trust is what it sounds like, right? That means I trust people for very simple reasons. They do what they say. They show up on time. Very sort of straightforward things. So practical trust usually expresses itself through things like process, tools. It's very foundational. But the problem is that most teams, most development only focuses on practical trust. And again, if all that I'm doing is to say, are you going to show up and do the basics? It is not a surprise then why they aren't doing better work. Because the problem is that whenever that happens, most people are only showing up for a paycheck, because they are doing whatever somebody tells them to. They are checking a box because somebody told them to, and that is not what it is you want. Now, the mark of really highly mature teams, of highly successful teams, comes in emotional trust. And this is really whenever you feel like somebody's on your side. You can trust them with something that might hurt you. You'll hear people start to say, my leader believes in me. I believe in the mission of this company. They start to use those sort of emotional words. And again, it's something just even in your own life to be able to watch out for. But these are the things that come to life in culture, in leadership. But teams that have this do amazing transformational work. But again, this is whenever people come to work for each other. If you think about it, in sports teams, in the military, in music, right? Like jazz is a living exhibition of emotional trust. Hell, even superhero movies, right? Like the Avengers always struggle until they all start to really trust each other. And then we get the big finale movie that makes billions of dollars. We see it every day. But so often in our own teams, we struggle with how to bring it in there. But it's these 2 types of things that really become important. Now, everybody loves numbers. So here are some numbers that we've actually really studied and found. If you look at teams that are high trust, high performing teams, on average, the people have about 100% more energy, 75% less stress. They're 50% more productive, 75% more engaged, 40% less likely to burn out, 30% happier whenever they go home, sort of a big deal. And on average, they take about 13% fewer sick days. So there is a very direct correlation to, again, business performance. And I think that's the thing, is everybody thinks this creativity and innovation is like voodoo. What's the value of being creative? Why is it that, but then at the same point, those same executives out of the other side of their mouth will talk about Apple and Facebook and Nike and Google and, whatever the companies are that invest in this sort of stuff? But I think here's the exercise I ask everybody to do to think about this. And I think that, there are actually 3 sorts of trust here. There is none, there's practical trust, and there is emotional trust. And so, whenever you think about this, the thing that I'll often ask people to do is to do a scorecard. Take the 5 or 10 people that you work with the most and to go through and say, which one of them do I not trust at all? Which one of them do I have practical trust in? And then which ones do I have emotional trust in? And, the other thing is you sort of get half points if you have emotional trust because you do something outside of work. If your kids play baseball together or soccer, or if you go out for beers, that may have been formed outside of work. And so again, it's something just to think about how do you bring that inside of work? But here's the thought I want to leave you with, and then we can get into the Q&A on this. We have a once in a generation opportunity here to affect change, because again, I've seen this in my own career and with so many other teams. Change is often so damn hard because it's like trying to jump a moving train from one track to the other. There is never a moment to pause, to think, to be able to try something different, because it's the way we've always done it, because of all these different reasons. But I think that's the thing here, is that, it is a time to try those things. It is a time, and my hope is that coming out the other side of this, we're going to value mental health more. We're going to value trust more. We're going to value, a lot of those sort of things. And so again, I think, it's that ability to be able to really invest in these that is going to make it really important. And, and that's what I said is, so often these are the things that we knew we needed to work on. These are the things that we knew needed to be important, but we just didn't have the urgency or the time to evolve. And now we do, and we have the ability to do that. And again, I don't think after that, normal is not going to be what normal was before. I see too many leaders and too many people where the shelter in place orders seem to have extended to their brains, and they just don't seem to understand how do you actually go through and do this stuff. So I think for me, it really is about empowering vulnerability, because for us to make that human connection, to bridge this space, you need to do this. You need to invest in your people and do those sort of things, because only when you do that is remote going to be successful. If you think, let's just take what we did before and move it over, exactly, it's not going to work. Like, look, on the one hand, more translates than you think. But I think at the same point, you need to be able to keep what works and rethink what doesn't. This is such a moment to be able to do this sort of stuff, to be able to understand what you can do, to be there for other people, to lean into the moment, and to see that glass half full and see it for the opportunity that it is. Because like I said, these are the things that I've been talking about this for 2 years. And again, I can walk into any company in the world, because here's the secret. Every company is dysfunctional. Every company has problems. It's just how they actually go through. And to be able to do that, then I'm sure you can do that. And also, yeah, I'll be happy to share the deck after this and do whatever I want. Hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. I'm happy to send you the PDF for that. Or again, here's my email address. Look, I think if you want help with this, if you want, again, we have been completely remote. A lot of best practices around remote leadership. I do a lot of coaching for everybody from CEOs to executives, a lot of things like that. Feel free to reach out, because I think, we're definitely here to help with that stuff. So with that being said, and with us, I think having a little bit of time left over, definitely want to be able to kind of throw it over in to be able to get any questions. And so I know I saw a couple that were in the chat. I'll start with those. But then again, I think we also have the thought exchange place as well.
You can see them.
Yeah. So what are the key ways to develop emotional trust beyond people getting their work done? I think a big part of it is, like I said, just sort of being human. Part of it is, look, this is such a great opportunity to still build your culture. Like, have funny hat day, bring your kid or dog to work day, to be able to do things like that. Like, look, use Slack for more than just work. Like, I love that we have, if you love pets or cars or other things like that, those are Slack channels. We have a great bot that we use called Donut. And Donut is something that just every week pairs 2 random people together, and you go get a virtual coffee. I think there's no substitution to just sort of investing in people and doing those sort of things. I think there are more specific exercises that you can do that would probably be longer than what I have here. I'm happy to sort of follow up with that. But I think that's that sort of thing. It's like, again, when you start a Zoom, don't launch right into work. We will do like cribs where do it on your phone and walk around your house and explain what that is. If you live in New York, it's a real short tour. But if you live other places in the world, again, you can get a better sense of who people are. But I think that's the thing, right? Is just how do you make people into more than just a role, right? Or just a deadline. And I think whenever you're able to do that and start to work on that, and I think also it is to prioritize it, to make space, to talk about it, to be vulnerable, to not just expect everybody, like I said, to just invest in practical trust. That as a leader, if you want to say, look, I'm not 100% today, model what you want to do, then I think that also really puts it in a great space and puts it out into the world for being able to have those conversations. I so believe that vulnerability is going to be the new leadership currency. I said that for years before this. I'm damn sure going to say it a lot more after this. Because I just think, the people who you connect with are there where you want to go work, they're where you want to stay. And at a time when I think, that there's going to be a crush on creative talent and people who are able to do that, it's going to be sort of the new currency of a lot of teams. So what was the next one? Okay. What business or brands have been inspiring you with the way they've decided to approach marketing recently? So here's what I'll say with that, right? Is I think, for me, the ones that inspire me are the ones who have actually acted, not marketed. No, I think at the end of this, nobody's going to give a shit if you turned your store blue. Nobody's going to, care whatever your marketing message was if it wasn't somehow backed up by action. and that I think a lot of the brands are going to be remembered for either what they did or did not do. Again, I think, there's a lot of them to be able to see a lot of the like all the beer manufacturers that have started making hand sanitizer. If you look at, again, I think Dyson has been an incredibly impressive company for a long time. Within a day or two, they were able to start manufacturing ventilators. I think that that's the thing, is like, for me, the work is the truth. And I think you can see the companies that have been really functional, that do really good things, that, again, who are the ones that were able to be more responsive, to do curbside to pickup, to be able to do, those sort of things, have been the ones that I think are really going to be successful, and have been. And like I said, I think it's been, a cross section of those. I think there have been very few I've sort of experienced firsthand. I know there's a bunch that haven't been good. But I like I said, is I think the ones that mean it, that are, and again, I know, Matthew, I saw in the chat, you said talk about more about vulnerability. I think vulnerability is something, I don't think there's a time to do it. I think it is something that just needs to be a part of your culture. That I think that, the teams that we don't want to work for are the ones where it's just like, hey, go sell the message, or that we know people aren't really telling the truth, or that, again, at any given point, because that's the thing, you don't trust them. You don't want to, you just, again, you're showing up for a paycheck and very leery at any given point that you may get laid off, or things like that. Again, the best work I've ever done in my career was because I did it for leadership who trusted me, maybe more than they probably even should have. But because in those moments, they talked about what their challenges were, what they were up against, what we were doing. There was 100%, I was not going to let them down. I was not going to. And again, that's the best work of my career came out of that. We turned around entire companies, industries, but it so went back to that ability of just being honest with each other, of saying, where are we at with things? Like, again, a simple trick that I think works really well in remote is that I've done with my teams is just have anxiety parties. It's a great way to be able to just be vulnerable, to be able to say, look, just what's everybody worried about? What's everybody thinking about? What's on your mind? And again, it's the intent isn't to solve it. The intent is to let people know they're not alone, to be able to say, look, this is something, how do we work on this together? How do we do those sort of things? So again, it can just be that sort of simple thing can be really effective. But like I said, as I think, there's some of the brands that definitely come to mind. Like I said, a lot of the different food chains, how they've reacted. I think some of the local ones, how they've been doing, and Lord, I hope they get more support around that, have been good. But again, I think that's the problem, is it is so wildly hit and miss on what they've been doing. But like I said, I think a few of them, a few too many, also are thinking about it as a marketing message. And again, I just don't think it's the time for that. I think people see through it. The next one. Oh. Any tips on how to invest in culture in a cross-cultural team? How are we inclusive of culture in company culture? That is a fantastic question. And again, I think this is, so again, there's some startups that I work with in this space, but I think also for me, inclusivity needs to be race, gender, sexuality, even the way you work. Because I think, a lot of people, like, if you're an introvert, it is super hard in many cases to be successful, because like everybody's watched a few too many movies, and kind of thinks that everything needs to be this big alpha loud sort of thing. Again, I think the ability, for me, the best ones are, if you can, to try to bring forums where you bring all those different opinions to the table. And like I said, for me, that was a part of even the cultural cards, of inviting diverse perspectives to the table. I think the best way to do it is to bake it into the culture of your team. Now, I know that's not always possible. There are a lot of teams that I work with, there are boys clubs that are exclusionary. There's too many people who look like me. I think if that's the case, then if you can, to try to educate people, to try to, again, to be vulnerable and say, look, the way that we're working, I don't feel like is working. How can we be able to work on this and to do it together? And like I said, as I think in a lot of cases, if you're able to start with a question instead of a statement, sometimes that helps. I think if you go to people and to be able to say, look, I'm having a problem with this, how do we work on it? I think that can help. Bring in third parties. Again, there's a lot of work that I do, or again, there's startups that I work with in terms of bringing them in that work on these sort of what we'll describe as cultural defaults, of the ability of like, hey, this is the way we've always worked, and that's what we want to do, and nobody's really looked at it as if it was good or not. But like I said, it's a complicated issue. So as I said, those are sort of the big ones, but in many cases, it does require a slightly more detailed talk to be able to understand what's happened, what's working, and what isn't. But like I said, is I think, to be the one to try to start the conversation usually goes a long way.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen. We're at 3:20 now, so great timing. We'll we'll wrap this up.
Perfect. Cool. Well, hey, thanks so much. Like I said, reach out. I'm happy to share the deck, answer any questions, do anything like that. But yeah, thanks so much for staying up, being a part of it, doing whatever. And hey, thanks so much.